Hi, Mark. Thanks for
Hello,
joining me
Cynthia.
today.
Good to be
So,
here.
I know, Love Notes from the Soul kind of came out of a vision after I'd been to Big Sur for a weekend at a silent retreat, and it took on kind of a life of its own. You published your first story in the Love Notes anthology, Recovering Intellectual, right?
Exactly.
And how did it feel to publish your first story?
It didn't really feel real for quite some time until I started sharing it with more people and until I got that physical copy. It was kind of that progression from an electronic version, which still feels a little ethereal, to then the tactile, in your hands, the physical thing, and having a stack of those books in my home and then giving them to friends. That was the really meaningful part, I think, is that having a concrete piece of evidence of, yeah, this is it. This happened.
There's nothing quite like that feeling, right? Of the first time you hold that book in your hand, you see your name in print. It's so much
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
And that was a beautiful piece. So, how did publishing or the process of publishing and then sharing that with your friends and family and colleagues and all the people in your world, how did that change the way you see your writing, if it did at all?
I think it helped me realize that I have stories worth telling, that I have a voice that is distinct and that lets other people see me, and that also creates the possibility for even deeper connection with the people who already know me. But to be able to reveal something in the written word is always different than just, a spoken relationship. And so even people who've known me for most of my life saw something different revealed in that writing. And that probably it was a little bit of a surprise and something really meaningful to me to share a different level of connection and more of myself through that writing.
Is deeply personal. It was a personal essay. It was a book full of personal essays. And it is really remarkable how you didn't seem to me to reveal deep, dark, heavy truths. You were revealing illuminations and insights. And yet, it's all very deeply personal. So I could see how people would see you going, I never knew that about you.
Mhm.
Your mom featured largely in that story. What did she think about it?
Yeah, we had some conversations about it. She sent me a text afterwards, and then we did talk about it quite a bit. And it was hard. I was really sensitive in writing about it because I wanted to be kind and I wanted to be generous and I wanted to be fair. And she doesn't have an especially prominent role, but I think, like with anybody, we are deeply shaped and influenced by our family members, by parents. And so it was, I think, about taking some amount of responsibility for this is the way that I am in the world, that this intellectualism and life of the mind was heavily encouraged. And I learned a lot of those things from her. So I think she was able to acknowledge and see how that was very true for me. And I also, it created a little bit more spaciousness because I realized in my conversation with her and in writing the piece that I had held her in this kind of narrow regard. I think, these people that we love and we spend decades and decades with, that we can confine them to an image of who we thought they were and continue to treat them in the same way.
So true.
And she's changed, she's grown, she's not the same. And as much as I want that same kind of grace and latitude, I need to afford her that as well. And so
Mhm.
to have a conversation about, well, what was it like for you in Prague when we're standing in that incredible 800-year-old cathedral. What was that like for you there? And it's not that my mom doesn't feel a sense of awe or feel as deeply as I do, but she has a different way of emoting and expressing those kinds of things. And so I think it created more connection and empathy and understanding between us to just go more deeply and to talk about what was in there. So in some ways, it was kind of this invitation, which I think is the best writing. It's an invitation into a greater conversation, perhaps.
I love that. I love that. I often find writers are very timid about writing, sharing their writing with the people they know and love. It's
Mm.
scary. And I felt that when I published What is Possible from Here, my collection of short stories, because I wrote about my sister, my oldest sister, whom she's always been my older sister and kind of an icon in my life. And I was a little bit worried, but those worries dispelled when she read it and she said, "I feel like I know you so much better." And it was very sweet.
Yeah.
So I understand that balance that a lot of writers walk when they are
Hmm.
revealing. It's one thing to reveal stories about yourself, but then when you include others, it's a it's sharing their intimacy too, in a way.
It is, yeah, and showing some real care around that, and then realizing, as I was going through different drafts of it, realizing, okay, some of this does need to be on the cutting room floor, where it's like, oh, there's some stronger feelings there that I think that's just for me to write about. It's not to share with other people. So
Yeah,
being able to discern what is fair, what is true. We all have our own truths, right? And
yes.
perspectives and ways of seeing the world. And to try to do so and in our treatment of other people, for that to reflect some truth of who they are, and also to do so with a level of, I think, compassion. And so even in like those initial drafts of like, well, how am I talking about my mom? And there sometimes there's a little bit of an edge there of judgment. And it's like, oh, these are the parts of myself that I don't like. Let me just offload them onto this other convenient person.
Especially since they're not here. Yes.
That's right. Like it's a one-sided argument. I get to say everything I ever wanted to. Yeah.
Awesome. I just have one more question for you. And I know that you're an avid reader, so I'm curious about how what you read affects your writing. And what are you reading now?
I'm reading a couple different things. I'm reading a book by Thomas More, which is Care of the Soul, that I
Mm-hmm.
learned about from Susan Cain. She had excerpted a few of his writings on her Substack, and I thought, oh, I want to go to the source. Let me read about that. And then I'm reading something completely different. I'm reading a book called Nexus from Noah Yuval Harari, and it's profound and disturbing on AI and civilization and
Yes.
big, timely topics about our world and civilization. And in terms of how they affect my writing, there's never a direct correlation. I can't say, oh, this created this, but it's kind of like a, a whole ecosystem. It's an environment in which my ideas, my feelings, my thoughts, all of it, it's just kind of like this stew. It's all kind of simmering in there. And so I don't ever know like exactly where an idea is going to come from, but I'll have these just kind of synchronistic connections between different ideas and things that I'm reading. And that's the fun thing, I think, about reading widely and with a lot of variety. And there will be stylistically some things where I can say, oh, wow, this one's really in the foreground because clearly I've been reading more Mary Oliver. And so what I even notice about the world, right? It's like borrowing somebody else's lenses on the world. And so
Truly.
what I tend to notice as I drive from Seattle to the east side, what comes out to me, how I would describe a tree. And so it becomes this whole filter for the way I experience the world, which can be so transporting, right? When you start to feel a certain monotony about the world and like, oh, more of the same. And it's like, oh, but then you read something and it's like, oh, it transforms everything.
Yes. Yes. Beautifully said. I love it. Well, always love speaking with you, Mark. You're always a fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for letting me pick your brain a little bit today, and I can't wait to read what you write next.
Thank you. I appreciate it.